Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome once again. As is our tradition, at this point we go around and introduce ourselves. Suggest you pause briefly before saying your name. Not that we are all supposed to know everybody's name right off the bat, but you know. Then I will introduce our speaker. As I mentioned before, after that we'll have a half-hour social period. So let me start with myself. My name is Oswaldo.
Hi, I'm Rowan, like Rowan and Martin. My name is Heisi.
My name is Michael.
My name is Rich.
My name is Jay.
My name is Lee.
My name is Charles.
Peter.
My name is George.
I'm John.
My name is Philip.
My name is Greg.
I'm Carl.
My name is Henry.
My name is Robert.
I'm Alpha.
Dennis.
I'm Tony.
Jim.
I'm David.
My name is Cass.
I'm Jack.
My name is
Ray.
I'm Tom.
Francisco. My name is Paul. My name is Francisco.
My name is Roy.
My name is John.
Jeff.
Don. Jose.
My name is Michael.
I'm Richard.
Jay.
My name is Harley.
My name is Marcy.
My name is Matt.
I'm Jerry.
I'm Jim.
Paul.
I'm John.
And a special welcome to those of you here for the first time. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dale Borglum, whom many of you know because he's been here several times before. He's the founder and executive director of the Living Dying Project. He's a pioneer in the conscious dying movement and has worked directly with thousands of people with life-threatening illnesses and their families for over 30 years. In 1981, Dale founded the first residential facility for people who wish to die consciously in the United States, the Dying Center. He has sought for and lectured extensively on the topics of spiritual support for those with life-threatening illness, caregiving as a spiritual practice, and healing at the edge of illness, of death, of loss, of crisis. Dale has a BS from UC Berkeley and a PhD from Stanford. He is the co-author of Journey of Awakening, a meditator's guidebook, and has taught meditation for 35 years. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces, and thank you for being inside here on such a beautiful day outside. Today I would like to talk about the joy of taking refuge. In Buddhism, at the beginning of retreats, often at the beginning even of a practice session, we do what is called taking refuge. It's done 3 times. It's often done rather automatically, without much heart or forethought. And we take refuge in 3 things. We take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Dharma, we take refuge in the Sangha. And then we say, for the second time, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. And then, guess what? For the third time, we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. In thinking about what I wanted to talk about here today, and partly in a conversation I had with Jim, who has instantaneously become a dear friend, I really wanted to find a way to sneak in joy and devotion in this Buddhist establishment that we have here. And usually when I talk, I don't make any notes because I just talk out of my heart and off the top of my head. But when I talk to Buddhists, I think I have to make some notes because I want to talk Buddhist, and it's really not my first language. It's sort of like Buddhism is my second language. So anyway, probably most of you have a rough idea what Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are. And I'll mention what they are in an outer sense. But if we really then begin to investigate together what the deeper meaning of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are, I think it can lead to a very deep quality of joy and of inspiration and of devotion. Many people, when they're practicing, begin practice, there's a lot of enthusiasm. Wow, meditation is this wonderful thing. Look at all that I'm finding out about myself. But after a few months or a few decades, depending on how stubborn you are, one begins to feel a little bit stale in one's practice. And practice begins to be something that you do out of habit, or maybe you don't do out of habit. It becomes something that is done in a way that makes you feel calmer. You have a slightly more efficient personality structure. Maybe you think you can make a little more money or find a slightly better grade of partners. But the notion of actually practicing as a way of finding liberation from suffering, of actually touching that place that is our intrinsic freedom, becomes lost because practice is a long, often difficult process. One of my early teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche, said that until one becomes truly bored with practice, you haven't gotten very far. So what is taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha? Taking refuge means finding a place where you feel safe, protected, and secure. In fact, in Hawaii, they used to have refuge temples where if you did some horrible things, such as letting your shadow fall upon the king, which was a capital offense, if you could make it to the refuge temple before the guards or the soldiers got you, you would be free. So what we're talking about here is there a place of that freedom, a place of safety that we can find in our practice? So the Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha, is taking refuge in an outer sense in the fact that this fellow Gautama Buddha existed a long time ago, 2,500 years ago. And he, though, became the living embodiment of awakeness or awareness. So what we're really taking refuge in is not this fellow, but we're taking refuge in awareness. We're taking refuge in the fact that you and I are intrinsically awake. And in fact, all of the spiritual traditions say that enlightenment isn't something that we find or that we create, but it is in fact who we are already, we have just forgotten. That in this moment, Sunday morning here at a little after 11 o'clock, we are enlightened, we are awake. We may be identified with ego structure in a way that makes it difficult to experience that in a moment-to-moment way. But there is nothing to be found. And as long as we look outside trying to find that, we're really looking in the wrong direction. Here are some quotes from some of my favorite enlightened people. One fellow, Wei Wu Wei, said, "What you are looking for is what is looking." Another teacher, Swami Nityananda, said, "Be peaceful, I am everywhere." And my Guru Maharaji said the best form in which to worship God is every form. Okay, so what these people are saying is that sense of freedom is here right now. And we can begin to feel that awakeness in our body even at a cellular level. Right now, I'm talking, you're listening, we're here together. But is there also inwardly this sense of awakeness that you could feel vibrating in your body? There are really three qualities to the awake mind. If we're coming through the mind channel, the channel primarily of Buddhism and psychotherapy, for instance, the quality of awakeness, of awareness, is felt as emptiness, of spaciousness, that the mind is as vast as the sky. Weather will come flying through this part of sky that you're looking at, but it is only the weather, it is only the clouds, and you are the sky. If we come through awakeness through the body channel, awakeness is experienced as a sense of aliveness in the body. Right now there is this vibrating sense of aliveness, and if we really begin to tune into that eventually we can feel it even outside of ourselves. We can feel it in inanimate objects as well as people that are around us. And if we come to this awakeness through the heart or this quality of spirit, awakeness is experienced as presence. That there is that radiant presence in each of us that can eventually be experienced as joy. So there are practices to awaken these qualities. There is something called Guru Yoga in Tibetan Buddhism, where you imagine seated in front of you a form of the deity that appeals to you. There is the Buddha, there is Hanuman, there is Christ, there is the Mother. And this being appears to you as radiant golden light. Out of this being comes from her or his heart a ray of golden light that goes into you and purifies you of any remaining obscuration. And you then become a being also of the same substance, of exactly the same substance, of radiant golden light. And then gradually you merge with this other being. So even though this is a visualization, it is also in fact fundamentally the nature of things as they are right now. Right now, you and I and the Buddha are made out of exactly the same substance, of pure awareness, of consciousness. There is nothing we can do, there's no amount of alcohol you can drink or drugs you can take or TV you can watch that will separate you from your identity as pure awareness. We can certainly forget it. We can certainly distract ourselves from it because in a way, and in fact, this is what practice is about, in a way, it is difficult and frightening to realize that we are awareness because it means that who we thought we were has to die. That the fact that I think I'm separate from you, and I guess I was just told I have a PhD from Stanford, so that's who I am in a certain way, that I, even though I have those identities, that is not fundamentally who I am. I take refuge in the Buddha. For the second time, I take refuge in the Buddha. For the third time, I take refuge in the Buddha. So can we do that not in an automatic parenting way, but actually remembering that we are that? Which reminds me of a very lovely story. Maybe some of you have heard this story. It's making the rounds these days. But there was a young boy of about 2 or 3 years old. And his mother became pregnant with another child. She was about to go to the hospital to have her baby daughter. And before she went, the little boy said, "When you come back from the hospital, can I be alone with the baby and talk to her?" And the mother said, okay, yeah, you can do that. She didn't quite know why, but she had her daughter. She came back from the hospital. And the brother was very persistent. I want to go in and talk to the baby. So finally the parents said, okay, but they were a little concerned that maybe he was jealous or something and it would harm the baby. So they decided to leave the door open a crack so they could hear what was going on. And the little boy came up very close to the baby and said very, very quietly, I'm beginning to forget, God, can you help me remember? I take refuge in the Buddha. Okay, moving on to the Dharma. Taking refuge in the Dharma. The Dharma, on the outer level, is the body of the Buddha's teaching, or the Christ teaching, the true teaching of all religions. The Four Noble Truths, the facts of karma and impermanence and suffering, all those things that we can read about in the books. And taking refuge in the fact that there is this path that so many people have been upon and many people have trod to a point where they found a great deal of freedom. That's a wonderful thing to take refuge in. There is this body of teaching, this body of truth. So we're not just taking refuge in the Dharma, we're essentially taking refuge in the truth. And in fact, all religions are starting out by saying, I'm taking refuge in the fact there is freedom, I'm taking refuge in the truth, and we'll get to the Sangha in just a second. So basically, taking refuge in the Dharma has a deeper level of taking refuge in the fact that we're living in a lawful universe, that things are unfolding in a way that can be talked about in terms of there's karma, there's impermanence, there's dukkha or suffering. But there's even a deeper level of taking refuge in the Dharma, that right now, in this moment, the Dharma is unfolding for each one of us. That whatever appears right in your face or in my face is your Dharma in that moment. That the absolutely perfect event, the only possible event in your life that could be appearing now to lead you to the next step on your path to awakening is exactly what's happening. So that we can begin to let go of the self-improvement project. We can begin to let go of trying to fix things or manipulate things. Some of you in the back row are having a hard time doing that. And I understand why when I look at the two of you. The Prajnaparamita Sutra says there is neither tainted nor pure. One time, my friend Ramdas was with our teacher Maharaji, and Ramdas said, Maharaji, I feel so impure. And Maharaji looked up Ramdas's sleeve and said, I don't see an impurity, Ramdas. So there is, in fact, no impurity. That is the Dharma, that there is this teaching, there is this perfection, that we can trust awareness itself. That just by being present to this moment, to this simple moment of us being together, is absolutely all that we need to move toward full awakening. So Rumi says things like, just this, don't turn away. Pema Chodron says, lean into your suffering. And in a way, that is the secret to practice. That when difficulties arrive, which we all know are certain to arise on our path, we have two choices. We can harden into aversion, or we can let those difficulties inspire us to open our hearts even more. To open to the difficulty and turn that into the gift that it truly is, because it is showing us a place where we are making life difficult. Cancer does not cause suffering. One of my dearest and oldest students called 2 days ago and told me that she has just been diagnosed with cancer in her spine and in her liver. It's a very difficult diagnosis. Can she work with that in a way that it opens her heart, even though fear will arise? Cancer does not cause suffering. Resistance to cancer causes suffering. And if she can work with that resistance, can she open her heart to the depth, to the extent that it gives her immune system, her body, the greatest chance to heal? When we get a cut on our finger, we trust that the body will heal it. We trust that eventually the skin will grow back together, the scab will fall off, and we'll be healed. Can we trust that also? That intrinsic movement toward healing in our hearts and in our minds, in our heart and mind. The heart is basically just the depth of the mind. We talk about it as the heart, but in Chinese there's only a single word for heart and mind, Sin, H-S-I-N. Heart is the depth of the mind is the surface of the heart. So can we trust that our heart will heal? Can we trust that our mind will heal if we take refuge in the Dharma, if we keep moving toward being willing to be with what is appearing in front of us moment to moment? Can you actually begin to have a love affair with the Dharma? It's easy to have a love affair with a person, with God, with music, with beauty, with art, but can we love the truth of the moment? Can we really begin to say, Dharma, I love you, to feel that in your heart, the way things are unfolding in your life, to meet that with openness rather than with resistance. So then finally there's taking refuge in the Sangha. And the Sangha could be also called connectedness or love. So that what we've done so far is we're taking refuge in awareness, we're taking refuge in truth, now we're taking refuge in connectedness. And if we think about it in those terms rather than these old polyworms, worms, that too maybe, words of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, taking refuge in awareness, taking refuge in truth, taking refuge in connectedness. The Sangha, in an outer sense, are the people in this room. We're practicing together. We just sat together. And this Dharmic path is very difficult to do on your own, almost impossible. So people come together in terms of being in a Sangha. You go to a 12-step meeting. You come to a Sunday morning meditation. Not only is the Sangha the people in this room, but at this moment, countless people are practicing all over the world. If you have a smartphone, there's something called Insight Timer, where you can click onto this thing and see people. There's little dots of light all over the world where people are having their timer on also, and you see who's meditating all around the world. So that there's this whole Sangha of people all over the planet, and their practice is in a very real sense supporting your practice. You're not practicing alone. So that we're taking refuge in the way that we are connected. When I mentioned my friend who was just diagnosed with cancer, when I hear that, when she called me and told me that, then in a very natural way, love, compassion arises in my heart and goes out toward her. We're loving each other, and that connectedness in love supports our practice. So Buddha said, don't believe what I'm telling you. Investigate it yourself. But even though he's saying don't believe, he is not saying don't keep your heart open. That we can have faith. We can have faith in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We can have faith in refuge as an inner experience. Once again, Trungpa, who's one of the most quotable people that was ever on the planet, I think, somebody asked him, what is it that we're really taking refuge in? And he said, well, from yourself, of course. So it's not faith in something outside of ourselves. It's really faith in this quality of the awareness, the truth, the love that we each have. And when we begin to deepen this faith, then out of that comes joy. Out of that comes a certain joy in practice. So that we're not practicing because we're suffering, we're trying to make suffering go away, but there is a certain joyfulness. There's a joyfulness in being quiet. There's a joyfulness in movement. There's a joyfulness in being with other people on the path. There are levels of devotion and levels of joy, if you will. In Buddhism, there are what are called the three turnings of the wheel: Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana Buddhism. Hinayana is essentially Vipassana practice. Mahayana is Zen practice. Vajrayana is Tibetan Buddhist practice. And beyond those three turnings is the non-practice of non-duality, of Dzogchen, or Mahamudra, or Maha-ati. But if we're talking about this joy of practice, this sense of devotion to the triple gem, it goes through stages of development. So for the first stage, the invocation stage of actually taking refuge, beginning to take refuge, is in hoping for or asking for a relationship. I'm taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha. I don't really completely feel it right now, but I have some faith that it exists out there. Maybe I felt it in the past. So that I'm taking refuge, hoping I'm beginning to feel that relationship. Hinayana or Theravada practice. Moving on then to Mahayana practice, which brings in the quality of compassion. Mahayana means great vehicle, a vehicle big enough not just to get you or me across the ocean of suffering, but all beings. We're practicing for all beings. And it brings in the quality of heart, the heart of compassion. So that in this level of taking refuge or of practice itself, we're beginning to feel that relationship. There is a heartfelt relationship between us and the Buddha, and the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the Mother, and the Christ. Then coming to Vajrayana practice, where we begin to find out that which we're in relationship to is not something outside. I am the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It is not something separate at all. And then finally, non-dual, non-practice, the teachings of Ramana Maharshi or Eckhart Tolle, Adyashanti, many other wonderful teachers, that which we're taking refuge in is the nature of everything. It's all of one taste. Cancer and non-cancer. Living and dying. Happiness and sadness. There is a joy that goes beyond happiness and sadness. So that one can be sad, and that can be part of your path of Dharma. There's a difference between being sad and being lost in sadness. There's a difference between having cancer and being lost in having cancer. There is this joy that is inherent in every moment when we have that faith in being fully present. So right now there is this joy. I mean, I've been talking for about half an hour. There's a lot of ideas that maybe you agree with or don't agree with or trying to remember. But beyond all of that mental activity, is there a joy? Is there a joy in this moment? Is there that God that 2 or 3 year old boy was trying to remember and talk to his little baby sibling about? So, to the extent that we can practice with faith and with confidence in the triple gem and the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, then this joy will begin to arise. And one can make a practice out of that. In this moment, can one be 75% with the joy, this quiet joy that is intrinsically part of each moment? And then there's 25% of you that's out here. We're in this room together. There's a whole bunch of people in the room, listening, talking, understanding. But most of our being is focused on that joy. And in fact, we're connected in that joy. And in fact, beyond that, we're one in that sense of joy. Ramana Maharshi said, devotion is nothing more than knowing oneself. Sogyal Rinpoche said, devotion is unbroken receptivity to the truth. Modern neuroscience has been finding that our brains are programmed over many, many centuries to be like Teflon to positive experience and Velcro to negative experience. Think about a long time ago, you're out there on the plane and you were being chased by a tiger. That one bad experience could ruin your day. So that if you go on a vacation, say, and you have 900 wonderful experiences, but you lost your wallet, you're really going to remember that one bad experience, that we tend to really grab onto and identify with the one negative experience. But neuroscience has been finding that if you take a positive experience and amplify it and be with it for only 20 seconds, that it stays with you. It goes into the part of the brain that retains things, whereas usually the positive things just go sliding right through. So when you feel those moments of joy, can you be with it? Can you amplify it? Can you just hold on to it? Not hold in a squeezing way, but rest with it, embrace it for 20 seconds, 10 seconds. I think it's 10, 12 seconds, a certain amount of time, that if you do that, it stays with you. Many of us focus on solving problems rather than on joy. Many of us have a career that is focused on solving problems. We get paid for solving problems. And so the mind gets in this rut of whatever appears, here's a problem to be solved, rather than resting in the joy that is possible in each moment. The Sioux Indian have a quote, sometimes I go about pitying myself while all the time I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. Sometimes I go about pitying myself while all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. We are carried by those great winds, those winds of joy, those winds of the inner Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, of awareness, truth, and connectedness. And finally, I'd like to read a lovely poem by one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver. Every day, in fact, the poem is called Mindful. Every day, I see or hear something that more or less kills me with delight, that leaves me like a needle in the haystack of light. It was what I was born for, to look, to listen, to lose myself inside this soft world, to instruct myself over and over in joy and acclamation. Nor am I talking about the exceptional, the fearful, the dreadful, the very extravagant, but of the ordinary, the common, the very drab, the daily presentations. Oh, good scholar, I say to myself, how can you help but grow wise with such teachings as these? The untrimmable light of the world, the ocean's shine, the prayers that are made out of grass. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. And in the joy that this taking refuge cultivates in each one of us. Are there questions or comments? Tom.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
What you said about, sort of maintaining 75% of your awareness to the internal state, to whatever we want to label that, and 25% outward. I like that. I strive for that. I go on retreats and hope to cultivate that. And yet, as you've said in the past, you come back and you're still 99% as neurotic as you were when you started. But on a day-to-day basis, how can we move more towards that? Because I'll get to doing it. I'll walk out of here right now and be busy putting stuff away and whatever, and I will lose that focus almost instantly. How can we cultivate that?
I don't know if this is a question where you're asking me to advertise my groups or not, but but it does seem like a perfect setup here. So these ancient teachings of Buddhism and Hinduism were developed thousands of years ago by and for people who were grounded, centered, unneurotic, and love their mommy and daddy. Okay. Is that anybody in this room? Okay. So, in these groups that Tom and Jim and previously Roy and some other people in the room attend or attended, we investigate that question. I find for myself that I get a lot of my information about how I can't stay in a joyful place by being with what it is that's going on in my body. And the Dalai Lama on his third visit to America said, now I'm beginning to understand you Americans don't like yourselves. It's assumed in a lot of these practices that we like ourselves, that we can begin this great project of letting go of identification with our separate ego structures that we have constructed perfectly to avoid our deepest woundedness and fears, and begin instead to identify with joy or with true nature or Buddha nature or Christ consciousness. And when we begin that big project from the standpoint of being ungrounded and uncentered and neurotic, things get very messy pretty quickly for most people. Practice becomes stale, it becomes frustrating, and this joy that I'm talking about, although we experience it occasionally, may be a perfect moment at the beach or through serendipity, a wonderful meditation, or you're with your best friend and had a perfect meal or something. But it's not an easy quality or experience to awaken in the moment on cue. So that I find by going back to the very beginning of practice, actually taking refuge in the body. What would it mean to take refuge in the body? It would mean getting grounded and centered. The earliest stages, the earliest developmental stages that a child goes through. From 0 to 2 is getting grounded. 3 to 5 or 6 maybe is learning to be down in your belly, being centered in the heart, the place from which martial arts are done. So what we're talking about here is doing the martial art of life. Can we right now be, rather than up in the head and off balance, top heavy, can we be down in the lower part of the body as a way of then supporting eventually the open heart? So the lower part of the body feels like a mountain. It's stable. It's unmoved by the winds of change. And then the sky-like heart, the vast heart, can have clouds of emotion coming through it, clouds of activity, of going out into the outer room and having to do Tom's activity after the talk here. But you're the sky. You're not the clouds going through the sky. So your question is a wonderful question, but the answer is more practice. I mean, it is cultivating a couple of qualities that I find are very important and rarely talked about. The qualities of humility and flexibility. That we have to be humble enough to admit that we're stuck, that we're caught, that we're lost, and flexible enough to keep turning our practice back to what it is that's going on now rather than what we think it should be. So like, for instance, if I start doing a compassion practice for my friend who just found out that she has cancer, and as I'm doing this practice, I'm noticing that my mind is agitated, or I'm bored, or whatever it is, and I'm not really able to do this compassion practice for her, I need to have enough humility to notice that, and then enough flexibility to start doing that practice for myself, so that I can get present enough so that I can then be there for her. But if I keep butting my practice up against this wall of trying to do something that I'm not able to do, I'll get frustrated and I'll probably quit. Other comments or questions?
Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, this is a different subject. Thank you so much for sharing your teachings and your lessons.
You're most welcome.
Of the joy of everything. I'd like something that's been coming up for me, people I've been involved with, of someone, for people who are having a practice and are trying to live consciously and look forward to dying consciously and having joy in all of the fears and disease. How does something like when someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they sort of know that their consciousness is going to be gone and they're not going to be able to have it, and the support system maybe not even there, how does that losing the ability to have a practice and to have consciousness going through the rest of life, how does that factor in?
That's a wonderful question. And I would suggest, first of all, though, that they don't lose consciousness. That consciousness possibly dramatically changes, but it is not lost. So that if the same person, instead of having Alzheimer's disease, had a brain aneurysm and suddenly died, the transition from being an alive, in control, vital human being to being a dead person would be so subtle, so sudden, so unsubtle, so sudden, that very possibly the shock of that, they might not be able to carry all their practice through to the spiritual opportunity that the dying process presents. But here's somebody who is gradually losing the ability to be in control, to understand, to take care of themselves in certain ways. And as they are losing those qualities, those abilities, consciousness is learning something. It might be expensive for the people that are taking care of them. It might be very emotionally frustrating for people that love them. But from the standpoint of consciousness, the function of consciousness is to grow and change. It doesn't care how long it takes or how much it hurts. So that as this person is going through this process, they are learning qualities that they were not probably very... they're learning qualities that they didn't necessarily cultivate in their lives. I have a PhD in mathematics. So I'm very attached to understanding, to being able to analyze things, to solve problems. If I got Alzheimer's, and if I were to die being still Dr. Dale the mathematician, that might limit the way I could go through the dying process in a spiritual sense. On the other hand, if I had Alzheimer's disease for a few years before I died, that addiction, if you will, to understanding would be slowly ripped away from me. And from the standpoint of consciousness, it would be a good thing. Now, one has to have a great deal of faith and practice to fully embody what I've just said. But we're all addicted. We're addicted. I'm addicted to excitement. I'm addicted to understanding. And we don't even have to start talking about the things we put into our mouths or do with our bodies. But just the addictions in our minds will also interfere with our spiritual process in terms of living and in terms of dying. And consequently then, learning to deal with these addictions, whether it's through spiritual practice or through Alzheimer's disease or having a cancer diagnosis, is part of the spiritual path.
Speaking of the other end of life, the beginning, and one of the things you mentioned early on about the young boy trying to talk to the baby, and the question that he asked, something that rang a few bells in my mind. I think there was a poem by Wordsworth or something about intimations of immortality. I don't know. It reminded me something I took. Of course, I took long ago, but something that I have experienced in a fuzzy way. That early on in my life, there were moments when I was like, "Wow, what is this life all about?" As a very young child, and that sense that it's something that I've known all along, and I don't know how to articulate. So I was wondering if you could say a few more things about that particular aspect of that kid talking to the baby and asking the baby, remind me, help me not forget God, or something along those lines.
I'm beginning to forget God. Please help me to remember. I think we all have an inner innate sense that there is something much vaster and greater than the way the mind and the body are unfolding moment to moment. We've had that experience. We've had that direct transmission. And whether that's from meditation or a drug experience or a sexual experience or being with a pet or being in nature, doesn't make any difference. That consciousness doesn't care how you get there. At the same time, in going back to the question about Alzheimer's disease, it's clear that we've created a personality that, for most of us, a lot of the time, it tends to dampen that feeling of total aliveness. And opening to that feeling of total aliveness, as wonderful as it is frightening, because it means that who we identify with has to die. Suppose you're somebody who's almost really successful, and your friends say to you, you seem to be self-sabotaging, and you think to yourself, but I want to be successful. Why would I do that? But if you look more deeply, becoming totally successful means not being who you think you are. And even though part of you says, I'd like to be that, another part of you says, wow, that's a really scary thing to be not who all along I've been thinking I am. So that in some very real way, practice is about slowly learning to trust that we can dive into this not knowing, into that relationship with presence, with joy. Ram Dass has a very wonderful metaphor that spiritual practice is like jumping out of an airplane and part way down realizing you don't have on a parachute. And a little further the way down realizing it's okay because there's no ground. But in that time between realizing there's no parachute and realizing there's no ground, there's a great deal of fear that there are big rocks coming very quickly. Okay, so Mayor Baba, great Indian sage, said, "Love is contagious. Those who haven't got it catch it from those who do." And any wisdom that I am sharing with you today is coming right through me from teachers that I've been with. There are teachers in India and Tibet and places like that. There's also my son. There's also people I meet on the street. That this quality you're talking about is something that really is a direct result of truly taking refuge. If I take refuge in the Sangha, then that aliveness I get from looking into your eyes, those of you that I know and those of you that I don't know. Okay, so I could talk about that. We could talk about that together for days, and it would be quite lovely, but let's move on.
You seem to be an expert on...
Next question. Could you start over?
On, having experience with people as they're dying, or whatever, being around a lot of people that are facing death.
Yeah.
If there was a political, a ballot in California on physician-assisted suicide, how would you vote on it?
I would have to read the ballot initiative.
Sponsors.
I have been around a lot of people who were approaching death, and they were having a very difficult time with their body. They were a lot in pain or had other very distressing symptoms, and or they had a lot of emotional issues going on. And they said, "I want to die now. Do you have some pills that I could take so I could die today?" And I've said to these people, I don't have those pills. That's not the end of the business I'm in. There are places you can go for those things, but that's not what I do. And a certain percentage of these people, I haven't kept track, but a good percentage of these people would contact me then a few months later and say, "Do you remember when I asked you if you could help me die?" I said, "Of course I do." And they said, "Well, I didn't die, and my life has been very difficult these last 2 months, but it has been the best 2 months of my life. And I'm so glad that I didn't take my life as a way of trying to avoid suffering." Any action done with the motivation of avoiding suffering will create suffering. And if you want to avoid suffering by taking your life, and you have really thought about this and meditated upon it, and you're not doing this in a totally reactive way, and have made this choice consciously, and then choose to do it in a way where you're doing it with great care, I don't think the government should have the right to say, "No, you can't do that." But at the same time, I don't think that people should just be able to go into the neighborhood store and buy poison because they're not feeling quite so happy that day, and it's a cloudy day and the Giants lost or something like that. So it really depends on what you want. If you want freedom, if you want liberation, then any situation is open to awareness and compassion. If you want to have happiness, then a lot of situations aren't going to work too well for you. Most of us in this room want both. We want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to have freedom, but we don't want it to hurt too much along the way. Good luck to us. I mean, that's it's going to. There are choices that are going to have to be made, and again, we're going to have to look at the places where we're not wanting to look at the truth of the moment, that it's too bright. Not only are we talking about looking at suffering, but we're talking about looking at love. We're talking about looking at joy. You felt that pure, deep love so many times in your life, I am sure. And yet, again and again, after we die into love, 20 seconds later, we're thinking about what's for lunch. The Tibetans say that when you die, the light of your true nature appears, but it is as bright as 1,000 suns. And if you have not gotten a bit used to looking at the bright light of joy, of love, of our true nature, then that light will be too bright, as it often is in our daily life, and we turn away from it. And that turning away, just as turning away from suffering, turning away from joy, creates further karma. Once again, there's no rush. Any other remarks or questions?
Then we have time for one more. So. Right here.
Oh, please.
So when we're working with people who are in great despair or sadness or fear as they're facing death or going through a very serious terminal illness, it's one thing for us to do our practice and prepare ourselves, but what can we do to help them in remembering and reconnecting to that joy amidst their emotional state?
So I have 2 minutes to answer that question. Come to the group. There are levels of practice. There are certain dualistic practices. There's the breath, there's Tonglen, there's awareness and compassion practices that can be taught. But there is also non-practice. There is the quality of being that you bring to the bedside or the table side of this person that you're talking to. And I was accused just recently of being an expert in doing this work. And I try not to be. Because as soon as I'm an expert, as soon as I'm Dr. Dale, the executive director of the Living Dying Project, and I'm here to help you, then it profoundly limits the way that you and I can connect. And if I can come in and be, let me start that sentence over again. The Dalai Lama says that one of the defining qualities of compassion is the ability to equalize and switch yourself with another human being. And if in any way I feel less than or greater than you, then in that moment compassion becomes impossible. And the mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses the abyss. The heart of compassion is what crosses the abyss. So for me to be with this hypothetical person that we're talking about means being there in a heartfelt way, and a heartfelt way that leads then to going even beyond dualistic heart, but non-dualistic heart, where you and I are in this together. And in that way, then, the place in you and I that does not die, that is beyond suffering, is being awakened between us. Can we do that right now? Do we have to wait till we get that diagnosis? Do we have to wait till it's a really, really, really bad day where there's pain in your body and or in your heart and mind? In this moment, can we meet together in that place that doesn't die? And if we can, then yes, all of the vicissitudes of life will continue to arise, but we take refuge in the Sangha. We take refuge in the Dharma. We take refuge in the Buddha. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dale. As far as the announcements are concerned, let me first remind you of the Pali word dana, which means generosity. And there will be, our host will be bringing around the dana bowl. Our suggestion is for you to contribute $10 if you can, or more if you would like to. That sustains our activities. The rental of the room, the Larkin Street lunch facility event that happens once a month, correspondence with people behind bars, etc. So I think we have a host over here. So
Yeah, I'm your host today. Please do stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha, or if you're new, check out if it's that may be Refuge one. There are vegan treats, and there's hot water for tea. If you have some tea, please wash your cup with hot soapy water. And I will be coming around with the info. At 12:30, some people get together and go to lunch. Anybody's welcome to join the gather at the front door. And that's my announcement.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
Wait, I have one more announcement. I am the coordinator of hosts, and we could use one more host. We ask for a commitment of one Sunday every 2 months. If that might be of interest to you, please talk to me when I'm walking around with the dog.
I forgot the next speaker, as I usually do, that there's collective memory in the Sangha that can tell us about who will be speaking next week.
You should have a sheet there with.
I know, I left it
I
over.
think it's a discussion.
It's
an open discussion.
Open discussion.
Thank you. Open discussion.
Yeah, which is, by the way, very interesting. Down when we get to break into small groups and the facilitator suggests the topics and we follow up on.
Yeah, I want Dale to announce what groups he's running.
Well, you have some.
There are some flyers out on the table. I believe the numbers are changing, but anyway, there's Monday afternoon and evening. There are 2 groups here in the city. The evening group is in the Mission District. On Tuesday, I teach a group in Santa Rosa, and on Wednesday night in Mill Valley. And at the end of the month, I'm going to do a 2 or 3 day workshop at the Shivananda Yoga Farm in Grass Valley. For those of you who would like to get out of town and eat some good vegetarian cooking. Also, if you really, the Living Dying Project just, let me even backtrack. Thank you for this opportunity. I was interviewed on a website called Buddha at the Gas Pump on 12/13/14 last year, and 6,600 people have viewed the interview, and we thought, why don't we try to leverage this into something that's marketable? So I teach workshops here in the Bay Area, but we've created an online workshop where part of it is pre-recorded and part of it is online streaming. So last Sunday I was teaching people in Latvia, France, Italy, Ontario, British Columbia, Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, California, etc. So if you know people around the country who might benefit by a workshop about conscious living, conscious dying, just send them to the Living Dying Project website, livingdying.org, and there's a lot of great material on there, a lot of guided meditations, talks by me. This talk will be on that website pretty soon, as the previous talks I gave here are on there. And we try to make this the go-to website for anybody who wants information about conscious dying.
Well, thanks again for a wonderful talk. It's time for our... Wait. I'm sorry.
Announcement. We have a GBF newsletter which is being published today. This is the first of the quarterly issuance of the newsletter. Excuse me. It is available on, or will be, on the website. But we also send out a little under 300 paper copies. Over 2/3 of those go to prisoners. And so we have those today to fold and stuff in envelopes and stamps. And so we do a kind of little, I think of it as a quilting bee newsletter in which we put that all together. So if I can get about 8 or 10 volunteers, I'll make it go quickly in about half an hour, a little more. So after the tea and refreshments. So could I see hands for some commitment? so we can. I'm waiting. What to be helpful? Thank you.
And anybody else that changed their mind?
Yes, change your mind too.
All right, so now it's time for the dedication of merits. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.